What's going on, everyone? We are shifting gears back into Star Trek mode over here as we have a new set of episodes just about to drop in our laps coming this Thursday. That's right, Lower Decks coming back strong with its third season to Paramount Plus. And as I really hadn't started this channel the last time Lower Decks was airing new episodes, I figured I'd go into a little bit of my thoughts into the series itself, and do I personally believe that it fits into canon, affects canon, ruins canon, all of those things that like to be bandied about online when we discuss Star Trek specifically, but really any sort of canon that people either enjoy or don't enjoy these days. So I want to start out by saying I was not that impressed at the beginning of season one. Really didn't care for it. It seemed like just a cheap excuse to throw in some relatively adult humor with some pretty well animated Star Trek backgrounds. Now, I will say after a few episodes, I really did start to enjoy the show, and it really did start to feel more like that Star Trek type of stuff that we had experienced, particularly in the Next Generation era. Extreme callbacks to the animated series and some of the less traveled corners of Star Trek, maybe not the most vaunted episodes, maybe not the most well-known episodes, the most well-known characters. Those things I enjoyed. I do not personally enjoy the character animations. And that's something that I see in a lot of animated shows these days. For lack of a better term, because it's the most popular of this form, I would have to say Rick and Morty. That type of very, very casual, quick animation style for the characters in particular. The characters in general is what I'm speaking to. All of the background stuff, the Star Trek consoles, the Alcars, the Star Trek related stuff outside of the characters, the ships, incredibly well animated, looks great, not really cutting many corners with that. It's this character aesthetic that I personally am not a fan of. The humor, as I said, is very obviously oriented more towards adults. This is not the childish animated show or the for kids, I suppose, animated show that something like Prodigy is. And I think that is both a detriment and an asset to the show itself. Obviously, that was going to try and bring in the Rick and Morty fan base, people that were into that sort of thing, but it's also keeping away sort of the same people that were reluctant to give the Orville a try when that came out, the people that didn't want fart jokes, didn't want dick jokes in their Star Trek, and that type of person may not ever be given the opportunity to enjoy this show for what it is. Do I think that it's the greatest example of Star Trek ever told? No. Do I think that it's something that fits into Star Trek canon? This brings me to my main, I guess, reconciliation of how the show fits in. I do believe it fits into canon, but I don't believe it fits into canon in the normal way. So in my opinion, and this is all speculative headcanon because it's obviously never going to be addressed in the show, I don't believe that this show takes place in canon in the same way as DS9 led on from TNG or Voyager led on from that. I think this is a show, I guess it wouldn't be a TV show, but some sort of a Starfleet broadcast. I think it's an internal Starfleet program, whether it's to be played on the holodeck, enjoyed on some sort of view screen, I'm not sure. But I think this is an in-universe, made by some creatives in Starfleet type of show for other Starfleet officers. It obviously couldn't be a widespread general audience type of show because there are some things in it that address possible classified information, or for all I know, maybe it's made after the fact, after these things have been declassified. All that being said, I believe this is a in-universe show depicting events from the Star Trek universe, and that's why it doesn't necessarily fit the same feel. There's a lot more jokes, there's a lot more humor, there's a lot of over-the-top situations that wouldn't occur in a real living universe, so to speak. So I believe this is made based on real events, and possibly some of these events are fictionalized versions of real accounts of things that have happened. That way, in like picture, I guess it doesn't happen so much today, but when I was growing up and earlier than that, it was a big deal to get a guest star on a TV show. They'd bring in a lot of sports people, a lot of athletes, a lot of people that aren't necessarily actors for a special episode. Like, you know, they'd bring on oh, hey, I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He'd just be walking through the town that just happened to be the hometown of the show, and hey, I stopped in the sports shop. I'm going to give a pep talk to the main character or something. A lot of things like that. So I think in the Star Trek universe, when they get characters like Riker or they get characters like Gomez, Tom Paris, any of the actual returning Star Trek characters, I believe they are playing themselves because they have reached celebrity status. Obviously, Will Riker, he's a very well-known Starfleet officer. Tom Paris was a, huge hero when he returned to the Alpha Quadrant from that whole Voyager fiasco lost in the Delta Quadrant. I think his coming in to poke fun at how well-known, the plate collecting, all that stuff, that seems like a celebrity coming into a show, playing themselves, and having fun with an over-the-top version of their character. Now, obviously, there's other things like, Q. Q guest spotted in one, but I could see John Delancey's version of Q being the type of person to pop in and be himself on a funny TV show, that doesn't necessarily break canon, or they could have just had somebody playing him. I don't know. One of my commenters on here brought up the possibility that it wasn't Will Riker doing the voice of Will Riker in this show. It was Thomas Riker in prison doing the Will Riker voice as part of his service to rehabilitate himself. I think that would also be a fun idea. But what am I trying to get to here? Well, I'm trying to get to the fact that for all the faults a lot of modern Star Trek has, particularly Discovery and Picard, because those are the ones that seem to be incredibly divisive as far as the fan base and canon goes, I think this show fits nicely onto both sides of the argument. It's a fun show that has a lot of Star Trek elements in it. It feels a lot more like Star Trek. I think the very first time that I felt like I was watching classic Star Trek was, I can't remember off the top of my head, the episode where they're doing a briefing room scene at the beginning of the episode, and it felt like I was back in TNG getting briefed on the scenario about what was going to occur, and then they went into the joke of somebody was coughing or kept talking. I can't remember what the exact joke was, but up until that point, I felt like I was smack dab in an actual Star Trek episode for the first time in a long time. I like this show. I don't think it's the greatest thing ever produced. I don't think it's the best Star Trek show, but as far as the actual TNG era visuals and a lot of the TNG era sound effects, characters even making guest stars, this feels the most like that TNG era Star Trek that we have had, I guess, since Voyager went off the air, because even the movies and Enterprise definitely didn't have the same feeling. I'm going to think through it here now. The reboot films did not. Obviously, Discovery did not. Picard, which arguably should feel the most like TNG era Star Trek, feels absolutely nothing like it, barring maybe the first part of season 2, episode 1, before they jumped back in time and completely threw out all of those feelings that we were supposed to have. That was a huge downfall of that show, in my opinion. So what am I trying to say here? I've already tried to sum this up a couple of times, but Star Trek Lower Decks, to me, is a fun show. It fits into Star Trek canon by not fitting into Star Trek canon, if that makes sense. To me, it's just an internal television program. Let's just go with a program, an internal story, an internal series of storylines going on based on real world events within the Star Trek universe, but played up to 11. Obviously, it's a more comedic, lighthearted take on actual events, and perhaps, the Cerritos never was a real ship. Perhaps all of the Cerritos crew was invented for this program, but everything else around them did occur. Kind of like if you go back to, let's say, I don't know, let's think of something like MASH. Those weren't actual characters or actual people that were in the Korean War, but a lot of the events going on around them were real-world events that occurred in the Korean War. So let's go ahead and just assume the crew of the Cerritos, not actual Starfleet officers, although that could be proven wrong, but the events taking place around them, the Dominion War references, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, all of those things occurred within the Star Trek universe. This is just a show made for Starfleet officers, taking place around events that actually occurred, but done so for historical comedic effect. It's just a fun show for people in the know in the Star Trek universe. And as such, I think that makes the show even more fun to watch. especially if you're the type of person to sit back and nitpick every little thing that goes on in Star Trek, like, well, this doesn't fit in. How could they be taking things so unseriously? Well, because it's not really taking place within the Star Trek universe as it would initially appear. So that's why I like the show. The humor is very hit and miss. The storylines tend to be interesting. The storylines tend to be fun. It's that humor that's going to be a very subjective thing. And if you can get past that and you can get past the, in my opinion, ugly character animation, all the background dressing animation is great. The ships, the consoles, the Star Trek technology, even some of the alien species when they bring back things like Armus or they bring back the Pakleds, you know, a lot of the fun references to older Star Trek stuff is a hell of a lot of fun if you are deeply engaged with this fan base. So I do want to say I do enjoy Lower Decks, and it doesn't break canon for me because it can't. And if you haven't given it a shot, and you are in the mood for something that has a closer feel to classic Trek with that more, and I hate to keep throwing Rick and Morty in because that seems to be the lowest common denominator as far as comparing the shows, but it's obviously a quick reference point that a lot of people will get. So if you haven't checked it out, you're in the mood for classic Star Trek feeling, knowing that there's going to be a lot of immature jokes, a lot of clever jokes as well, because a lot of Star Trek references did go into this. I think you may be pleasantly surprised if you can get past those first few episodes. I think season 2 did a hell of a job as far as upping the ante, so I'm very excited to see what comes from season 3. And this might be the most excited I've been for a Star Trek show in a long time, outside of Strange New Worlds, because that did surprise me. And even though I'm saying this show does not take place in an actual real world setting, this probably feels the most like TNG plus era Star Trek than any of the shows in a long time. So just wanted to give my thoughts out there. I'll be back with reviews for the new episodes when they drop. Probably, I don't know what time they're going to drop. If they drop Thursday morning, I'll probably have a review out Thursday. If they drop Thursday night, it'll probably be Friday, but stay tuned and figure that out. Until next time, keep on trekking.